Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Palestine Chronicle TV. Today, myself and my co-host, Romana Rubeo, will be discussing the ICC investigation of Israeli war crime, or what is meant to be an ICC investigation of Israeli war crimes. We don't really know what will happen, considering that the US is threatening serious retaliation against the International Court or the International Criminal Court. With me again is my co-host, Romana Rubeo. Say hello to Romana, to everyone.
Hello, Ramzy, and hello, everybody. Yes, Ramzy. In today's episode, we will discuss these questions and more with Dr. Triestino Mariniello, who is a senior lecturer at Liverpool John Moores University and a member of the legal team for Gaza victims at the International Criminal Court, the ICC. We can maybe bring...
Before, if you don't mind, Romana, before we bring Triestino on the show, just a very brief background for our readers and our viewers who are not fully familiar with what's going on. There has been various attempts in the past to hold Israeli war criminals accountable to crimes committed in occupied Palestine. We remember particularly the case of late Israeli leader and war criminal Ariel Sharon, where Palestinians tried to actually hold him accountable in Belgium in 2002. Sadly, the case was dropped again under American pressure. Now, the Trump administration is doing the same thing. They just signed an executive order. Trump signed an executive order where he put sanctions on individuals associated with the ICC. So the question here, the main issue that we want to raise is, will the US succeed once more in thwarting another international investigation of Israel? And will things be different this time around?
Yes, and we are going to ask these questions and more because, of course, the technical elements of these investigations are not clear to anybody. It's a very complex questions and matter. Triestino, it's of course our pleasure to have you. First, if you could kindly introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit more about how you became involved in the Palestinian case at the ICC.
Thank you very much for this kind invitation tonight, and I'm very glad to be here with you to discuss about the Palestinian situation before the International Criminal Court. As Romana said, I am senior lecturer in law at Liverpool John Moores University, where I've been teaching international criminal law for quite a few years now. Before going back to the university, I was working as associate legal officer at the International Criminal Court for the trial division and the registry. And how I became involved in this, being a member of the legal team for Gaza victims before the ICC. I've been working quite a lot in the past few years on the relationship between the ICC and the ICC and Palestine and the alleged crimes committed within the Israeli-Palestinian setting. And in the past few years, I've been coordinating a research project on the legality of administrative detention, law and practice in the West Bank before Israeli military court. And this report, which has been presented before a number of institutions, including the European Parliament and the House of Commons in London, also argues that the use of administrative detention by Israeli authority is a war crime, a crime against humanity. So following this research project, I've been contacted by lead counsel in Gaza, asking me to join the legal team, and I was honored and pleased to represent victims at the ICC now from Gaza.
Back to the issue that we've raised earlier in the introduction, Triestino. The U.S. now is trying its best to block the ICC investigation. And I know a lot of people are worried because at one point that there was this sense of euphoria that finally the ICC is stepping forward. Finally, the Palestinians are presenting a convincing and compelling case. Maybe this time around things will happen on a different trajectory than the past. But will it, considering what the US is planning to do? Can the US actually block the investigation?
Well, the answer is no. I mean, the US, the Trump administration is making a lot of pressure on the International Criminal Court. When we talk about pressure, we mainly refer to the Afghanistan situation, but also to the Israeli-Palestinian situation. So every time there is a statement by Pompeo or Trump in relation to the ICC, they never forget to mention both the Afghanistan situation, where, just to remind everyone, the prosecutor is investigating also alleged war crimes committed by CIA members and American US soldiers, and the situation in Palestine. This huge pressure so far has not really been very effective. If you think that, particularly in relation to the Afghanistan situation, the appeals chamber has directly authorized the prosecutor to start an investigation, actually overruling a decision that the trial chamber had taken, and where you could see some pressures by the Trump administration. We have also to add that, I mean, if we go back to 1998, when the Statute of the International Criminal Court was drafted, I mean, the US administration have never been really very supportive of the International Criminal Court. And the biggest problem in Rome when the statute was drafted in 98 was exactly on the role of the prosecutor. US opposed since the beginning to an independent role, to a prosecutor who could start an investigation without the authorization of the Security Council. So there has been this opposition, which goes back to the Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. Of course, what we are seeing now does not have any precedents. For the first time, they are issuing, at least this is what they are saying, we see if they will have some effects, the sanctions, economic sanctions, and visa restriction to individuals and maybe to organizations as well.
Yeah.
If I could just follow up that question, Triestino and Romana, I think the fact that you have countries that have been quite supportive of international law, the likes of Germany and now Australia and others, that are actually doing their best to thwart the investigation as well, and to use their special membership status to block that from happening. I mean, is that worrisome that you have a country like Germany that should, more than any other country, worry about, making sure that genocide and war crimes are not committed in any other parts of the world, that are now pushing for the opposite? They are trying to block such an investigation. Does that worry you at all?
To be honest, this was, at least in relation to some of these countries you are mentioning, there are at least 8 countries which explicitly are against an investigation into the Palestine situation. And some of them were quite surprising, to be honest. This, as you said, at least applies to Germany. Other countries, to be honest, very good friends of Netanyahu, were not really surprising for us. And it's even more surprising to see that in this list there are at least 4 countries, which I think are Uganda, Brazil, Czech Republic, and another country I will tell you in a few minutes, that they have explicitly recognized that Palestine is a state under international law. And now they have submitted statements before the trial chamber of the ICC saying that that's not true anymore. They recognize the statehood, but now they say that it's not a state for the International Criminal Court. Of course, the discussion is a bit more complex, but actually they are raising political arguments, issues before the International Criminal Court, which, to be honest, do not have any legal having legal basis. So it's surprising that these states, on one side, they always remind to the international community that they support an independent and impartial international criminal tribunal, but on the other hand, they are trying to exercise political pressures. I mean, that's not really in the interest of justice to stop an investigation.
And exactly for these problems that you just mentioned, Triestino, I wanted to ask you, where do things stand now at the ICC? First of all, before you mentioned the pre-trial chamber, you said the prosecutor could start an investigation on her own, but she decided to call on the pre-trial chamber, as we know. And there was, much doubt about whether the ICC was serious in pushing this case forward in the first place, and also questions about the ICC's own jurisdiction. For example, we mentioned Germany and other states that were saying that no, Palestine is not a state, so it doesn't. The ICC doesn't have a jurisdiction on its own. So where do we stand now?
Yeah. So going back to the previous question, the fourth state is Hungary. Where do we stand now? That's a very interesting question. Actually, the prosecutor last December decided to ask to the pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court the following question: does the ICC have jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine? Which means, is Palestine a state under the Rome Statute, not in general under international law, but at least under the statute of the International Criminal Court? And if yes, which is the territorial jurisdiction of the court? The prosecutor argued that the court has jurisdiction over the West Bank, so crimes committed within the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, of course. This request to the pre-trial chamber was not necessary, for a very simple reason, because the situation has been referred by Palestine, by the state of Palestine, to the International Criminal Court. So when a state party to the ICC refers a situation to the prosecutor does not need an authorization from the pre-trial chamber. That's the difference with Afghanistan, where the prosecutor needed an authorization by the pre-trial chamber. But let's just try to put this request within a wider context. The formal engagement of the state of Palestine with the ICC started in 2009, so more than 10 years ago, after the Gaza war 2008-9 Operation Cast Lead. At that time, Palestine already accepted the jurisdiction of the ICC. It took more than 3 years to the former prosecutor to decide that, actually after 3 years, he said, we don't know if Palestine is a state, so we don't know if they can accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. So they raised this question before the UN Assembly General and the Assembly of State Parties. In other words, they raised this, they delegated the answer to political bodies, not legal, not to the competent pre-trial chamber like it should have done. So what happened that investigation was never conducted, and we will never have justice for the victims of that armed conflict, Operation Cast Lead. In 2015, Palestine did even something more, not only accepted the jurisdiction of the court, but they also became a state party. After, so just very few minutes to give a bit of context, because I think it's important. After more than 4 years, the prosecutor submitted this request, as we said, which was not necessary. Now, where do we stand? We stand at the point in which the pre-trial chamber has decided to involve a number of states, as we said before, civil society, NGOs, scholars, experts, and to pose this question to all these experts. In other words, the question is whether Palestine is a state under the Rome Statute. The pre-trial chamber will decide on this because it has received the views of the victims, of the states, of civil society on this, and in the next few weeks or months will decide, will take a position on the request posed by the prosecutor.
Excellent. I wanted to ask a question that's maybe I should have asked in the very start here, and that is, I mean, we can imagine that there are many facets to the accusation of Israel that it has committed war crimes in Palestine. I mean, for those of us working in the media, we kind of see evidence of war crimes every single day. So it's kind of a no-brainer. But of course, in legal terms, it's a whole different question. So in your opinion, what would be like the most compelling case against Israel that it has indeed committed war crimes in Palestine?
Wow, that's really a killer question. We are talking with a so broad range of international crimes within the specific context. I mean, for sure, the prosecutor needs to conduct as soon as possible an investigation into 2014 Gaza war, so in the Operation Protective Age, so-called. So, also because it's already now almost 6 years ago, and as victims always say, justice delayed is justice denied. It's so difficult to conduct investigation for crimes committed long time ago, that I think this is one of the priority for sure of the International Criminal Court. Another priority I would add is the settlements. So the settlements, which falls within the scope of the investigation of the prosecutor at the moment as a war crime. Not only because that's clear, but also because, in contrast to what many experts say, I think that will be an easy case. Everyone says that the ICC, a lot of people say that the ICC should not deal with this situation because it's too complex, it's too hard, and maybe they will never conclude these cases. But if you look at the settlements as war crime, that's really, for me, an easy case. All the evidence is already there. I mean, and it will take not really age, but really short time for the court to start proceedings and cases in relation to this crime. But we can go on for hours in relation to the crime. So please tell me, if you want any specific focus.
Especially before we mention the Rome Statute, which is the founding document of the ICC. And Article 5 of the Rome Statute has an extended definition of what constitutes serious crimes. So the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. So it could be argued that Israel should be held accountable for all these serious crimes, yet the ICC opted for the so-called narrow scope of the investigation. So it will only be looking at the single component of war crimes. So why is that? Can you lead us through this?
Yeah, just a very brief clarification. So the court is competent in relation to the individuals, not in relation to the state. The court does not decide the state responsibility, but is dealing with the criminal liability of individuals in this case, of course, in relation to the specific situation. Why the narrow scope? Because if you look at the request of the prosecutor, in particular this paragraph 94 of the request to the pretrial chamber, surprisingly, to be honest, and victims have raised these concerns before the pretrial chamber, in particular Gaza victims, the scope of the investigation at this stage is, as you correctly say, is quite narrow. It only includes, in relation to the crimes committed by Israeli nationals, it only includes some incidents related to the Gaza war I was mentioning before. Crimes committed within the context of the Great March of Return and the settlements as a war crime. So, first of all, it's surprising not to see any reference to the alleged commission of crimes against humanity, which, as victims say, I mean, there is wide evidence. The commission of these crimes within a specific situation is widely documented. We're talking about one of the situations in which there is most evidence, in all the world in relation to the commission of international crimes. There is no reference to the widespread or systematic attack put in place by the Israeli authorities against the civilian population in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, or in Gaza. There is no reference to this at all. So, first of all, narrow scope, which exclude crimes against humanity, I think is something that the prosecutor should look back. Just to be clear, the scope of this investigation is not binding for the future. The prosecutor can decide tomorrow, after tomorrow, to include other crimes. And we hope that they really do this, because there are many victims who, let's hope the case will go on, but will never get justice. There is no, the overall situation in Gaza, for instance, is overlooked in the request. There is no reference to the 14 years occupation, blockade of Gaza military occupation by the Israeli authorities. There is no reference to the overall number of victims of the Gaza war in 2014. Let's, remember.
Why is that the case, Triestino? Why is Gaza being excluded? Is it because of the way that the Palestinians presented the case, or by the way that the ICC interpreted the Palestinian case?
I don't think that, I can exclude that 100% that it's the way in which Palestinians presented the case, also because Palestinian organization or international organization have really submitted huge evidence and have made a lot of submissions on the commission of international crimes. I think it's a prosecutorial strategy at this stage that we hope that will not be so narrow for the future. So in particular, in relation to the situation in Gaza, they have received a lot of evidence in what's going on in relation to the overall situation, to the crimes, all the crimes committed in 2014, for instance, in 2014. Which, as I said, the overall situation in Gaza is underlooked. The overall number of victims, if we think that more than 1,600 people, civilians, only civilians were killed in 2014, which include hundreds of children and women. In my personal opinion, there are several references in this request to the concept of conflict itself, which concept relies on the presumption that we have two parties that are fighting each other on the same level, and there is not a lot of room in relation to the occupation itself, which is really another something that to a certain extent does not really appear so frequently. And then in general, there are many crimes that do not appear in the investigation at the moment. I'm thinking in particular all the crimes committed against Palestinian prisoners, also within the West Bank. So we're talking of torture, inhuman or degrading treatment. We are talking of apartheid as a crime against humanity, of persecution, which again, there is huge evidence showing that all these crimes are committed with a persecutory intent against the Palestinians. So, and the deprivation of fair trial guarantees against Palestinian prisoners itself is a war crime and a crime against humanity. Why they don't appear in the investigation? We can say that we hope that there will be a different approach in the future.
Right, and I hate to complicate it even more for you, Triestino. It's just if you could help us, and like me personally, Romana and I have been doing a lot of writing and research about the subject, and one of the issues that we are kind of struggling and wrangling with as of late is what are the possible scenarios? Because as you said, and many of us already know, it's unprecedented. This situation is very unique and new. So it's kind of a learning experience for all of us. What should we expect if Israel or Israeli war criminals are in fact indicted for war crimes? What could actually happen if they're not? What are the scenarios?
So at present, while we are talking, we have different scenarios. There are different options. I think that if we assess this, we look at this question from the perspective of the Rome Statute, so of the law which is binding on the judges. So from the perspective of the object and purpose of the Statute of the International Criminal Court, I don't think that the judges have any other option that confirming to the prosecutor that Palestine is a state under the Rome Statute, and that territorial jurisdiction includes West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. So I don't think that there is any other, from the binding law for the judges, there is any other option at this moment. To be honest, I would find very, very surprising any other conclusion by the judges. As I said before, the state of Palestine ratified the statute in 2015. What happens today? You go back to them and you say, sorry, we have been joking in this 5 years you have been a member, but now we thought about it and you are not a member anymore. In the meanwhile, Palestine has been taking part at the Assembly of State Parties, has been a member of the supervisory committees of the International Criminal Court, so taking part in important decisions. So it's really be surprising. So this is the first option, that the prosecutor will receive a green light by the pretrial chamber. To be honest, if this does not happen, the prosecutor can go on. This decision was not necessary. I don't think will be binding on the same prosecutor. Maybe, as someone says, was a matter of opportunity. It was an opportunity for the prosecutor to clarify this issue now, not later. The other two possible scenarios are what I will say, the negative ones, and will prevent victims to get any justice. I mean, if we are talking of the ICC now, it means that these victims of war crimes, crimes against humanity here, have never received any justice before domestic courts. Palestine, actually, the state of Palestine is unable to try Israeli nationals, while Israeli authorities are completely unwilling, as they've been showing in these past few years, to try and prosecute individuals and convict of international crimes, not because Triestino says it, but this has been said many times by NGOs reports, and in particular by UN fact-finding missions, who have always raised the unwillingness of the Israeli authorities to prosecute anyone for very serious crimes. And indeed, where are these cases? So we are still waiting for them. So if the judges decided not to accept the jurisdiction, that would really prevent victims to get access to the only possible forum of justice they have at the moment. And there is a further scenario that I always mention, which I think is really more dangerous than the second one, so saying no to the prosecutor, which is accepting in part the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which means yes, but not to the territorial jurisdiction as a whole, which means excluding some parts of the Palestinian territory, which under international law, international humanitarian law, to be honest, does not have any legal ground, but will be very dangerous because it will give an international legitimacy to all the unlawful measures that today, but not just today, in the past, decades, Israeli authorities, in this case also the Trump administration, are putting in place against Palestine. So that will give a legitimacy also to the annexation plan. So I really hope that the judges will not, take this possibility into account at all.
Thank you. Just one last question before I give the platform to Romana to take us out. We hear about what the Israelis are trying to do, what the Americans, what sort of pressure that they are putting on the ICC directly or on other countries to pressure the ICC to halt its investigations or to change its definitions and jurisdiction and so forth. What can people, pressure groups, international human rights organizations, activists, peace and justice loving people around the world, what can they do during this period? Do we just sit and watch the outcome of all of this, or is this actually anything that we can do practically to encourage the ICC to move forward with this investigation?
To be honest, yes, there will be many answers. The first one coming up to my mind is sending evidence to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, making submissions under Article 15 of the Rome Statute in relation to the crimes we are talking about within the scope of the investigation, but not only, as I said before. I know that there are organizations that, for instance, are working on submission in relation to the crimes committed against Palestinian prisoners, which are not within the scope of the investigation, as I said before. So there is this possibility to make submission to the International Criminal Court. And the court so far has been, which also has raised a lot of criticism, has been very open to the civil society, requesting, for instance, amicus curiae, so views by the civil society. I think that making these submissions, taking advantage of this instrument, making submission, and with supported by evidence in relation to the crimes committed, would be a powerful instrument.
Triestino, if you don't mind me just interrupting you there, just because I am certain that
Sure.
there are people who are involved in this field, listening to us from Gaza, from the West Bank, who are going to say, okay, so I work, for example, Al Mizan human rights groups. Most likely
Sure.
you are already working with them. But let's just say that we have piles and piles of documents, photo, video evidence, everything that would strengthen the case of Israeli war crimes in Gaza. Do they go directly to the ICC, the prosecutor's office? Do they come through you? What is the channel? What is the proper way of actually submitting these documents?
I mean, the preliminary stage is to make a formal submission, like a good number of the organizations that are present in Palestine, both in Gaza and West Bank, have already been doing. So making the formal submission. And attached by the evidence. So all the documentation, yes, the answer is yes, they can be sent to the International Criminal Court. So supporting statements. But there is also something else, and this includes also organization you mentioned, talking with victims. So going to the victims, telling them that of these serious crimes, that now they can express their views and concerns before the International Criminal Court. So giving them the mandate to go before the International Criminal Court, saying we don't speak only on behalf of a non-governmental organization, we are talking on behalf of the victims of these crimes, bringing the stories of these victims and explaining to the court that, what I was saying before, that actually no investigation has ever been conducted at the domestic level. I hope I answered to your question.
You did. And it just reminds me that in 2002, when Israel carried out the infamous Jenin massacre in the refugee camp of Jenin in the West Bank, at the time I had a book called Searching Jenin that came out, which is documenting the massacre from through eyewitness accounts. And I was really surprised to see the Lebanese and Palestinian lawyers that were taking Ariel Sharon, or attempting to take him to court in Belgium, actually requested to use the book as part of the evidence. And of course, for us journalists and writers, it was quite validating that our efforts is being, used as legal documents. And unfortunately, nothing came out of it at the time, but hopefully there's been a lot of good work of, I know that at least hundreds of testimonies that have been submitted to various human rights groups in Gaza after the war, and I'm sure that many of them will be used there as well. Thank you very much for spending this time with us, and Romana.
Yes, just one last question to Triestino, because I think it's a unique opportunity for us to talk to somebody who is actually in touch with the victims too. Because we were talking about countries and, prosecutor and states and sanctions and presidents, but I was thinking about the victims that, as you said, did not get any justice. So how do they feel about it? Are they hopeful about this investigation? What are their feelings?
I mean, to be honest, I can talk at least in relation to the victims we represent. So from the Gaza Strip, there are huge expectations among victims. I find it surprising when someone says we have to keep victims' expectations here low because we don't know what's going on. It's an international institution, as we say, there are a lot of pressures and so on, which is true actually. So it won't be easy. And if these proceedings will take age. We don't expect conviction coming before 7, 8, 10 years, if we look at the other cases before the International Criminal Court. But to give the idea that there has not really been any possibility for these victims to express their views so far, to get justice for the atrocities committed. I'm talking about, in particular, about Gaza now, that as soon as the prosecutor made this request, the expectations are very high. And that's also one of the reasons why, I would find very surprising if the judges decided to deny this possibility to the victims. So, and I hope this will not happen.
Thank you very much, Triestino. It was really a useful discussion, and I think our viewers also enjoyed it, because there are not so many opportunities to see clearly what's happening on this matter. So really, thank you, Triestino.
Thank you very much. It was very informative indeed. We learned a great deal from you, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show at one point in the near future as well.
Thank you very much, Ramzy. Thank you very much, Romana. And yeah, have a good evening or night. It depends where you are.
See you. Bye-bye. That was excellent. Really, really informative. You can do so much research about the subject on your own, but when you kind of have an international law expert kind of connecting the dots, things start making a lot more sense. So this is it for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Romana, sorry.
Yes, no, having the human touch too, because Triestino is really, like he was giving us like a human touch to talking about the victims and what they're hoping for and their expectations. So I think it's really important that we always keep in mind what we are referring to when we talk about these issues. We are talking about these crimes, and we're talking about things that, as you were saying, we in the media, we know what is happening, and it has been going on for so many years. And really, we can't wait for, the victims to get some justice at some point.
Absolutely. And of course, at the Palestine Chronicle, we will continue to update you on the ICC investigation, however it takes. You are going to see more such excellent international law analysis like that by Triestino. We'll be following up on the case. Go to the Palestine Chronicle right now, learn more about what is happening as far as the ICC investigation of Israel is concerned. Other news, analysis, we are constantly updated, and we appreciate all the support that you have been giving us. And we will meet again here next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Palestine time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.